Welcome to Tales of Wild West. The wind moved slow over the flatlands that evening, dragging the heat with it like a tired old mule. Dust clung to the sky in amber ribbons, the last light of day stretching across the scrubland, painting the edges of everything in gold. A lone cowboy rode through it all, reins loose in one hand, the other resting over the saddle horn like it had been molded there by years of silence. His name was Colt Avery. He wasn't young, nor was he old, but he carried himself like a man who had lived enough for 3 lifetimes and didn't much care for a 4th. His hat was sweat-stained, the brim curled from time and sun. His mare, a quiet gray thing named Belle, walked as if she knew not to rush a man who wasn't in any kind of hurry. They stopped at an old trough just off the trail near a half-fallen barn, where the boards leaned like drunkards trying to remember which way was up. Colt dismounted, letting Belle drink. He dipped his canteen in the water barrel nearby, swirled the grit from the bottom. The world was hushed, save for the sounds of slurping water and the creak of leather. Then he heard it, soft as wind through dry grass. A shuffle. A breath. He turned slow. She stood half-hidden behind the barrel, barefoot, small. A girl no older than 8, her face streaked with grime and sunburn, her hair tangled like she'd run through thorns and never looked back. Her dress hung loose over thin shoulders, once white, now the color of the earth. Eyes too big for her face stared up at him, not with fear, not even hope, but something hollow. Colt didn't speak. He just looked at her the way a man might look at a stray dog, not sure if it'd bite or beg. She stepped forward, lips cracked, chin trembling. "Please," she whispered, voice dry as bone. "Save my mama." Colt said nothing. He didn't need to ask what she meant, not yet. "They tied her to a tree." Her eyes darted west, toward the horizon melting into the hills. "Left her there. Said she'd die slow." Colt's jaw worked once, then went still. He crouched slowly to meet her eyes. "What's your name, girl?" She didn't answer. He didn't ask again. He stood, grabbed his canteen, and without another word lifted her into the saddle. She didn't flinch, just sat sideways like she'd done it before. Colt tied the reins around the horn, slung his rifle across his back, and led Belle by foot, heading into whatever shadows lay waiting in the low hills beyond. The sun dropped fast behind them. Crickets sang low songs. The girl stayed silent. Now and then, she'd lift a hand and point, not like a child, but like someone who'd been following a map made of memory and fear. Colt didn't rush, but he didn't wander either. He walked like a man who'd made a choice and didn't plan to unmake it. He glanced up at her as they moved through a narrow canyon. Her small fingers were wrapped tight in his coat, knuckles white. He remembered a time when hands that small used to cling to him, once. Long ago. Before fire took his wife. Before fever took his boy. "You got a name for your mama?" he asked soft. This time, she answered. "Maribel." Colt gave a nod like a prayer. They reached the top of the ridge when the moon broke free from the clouds. Below, the land stretched flat again, with a line of cottonwoods marking a creek gone dry. She pointed there, stiff-armed, like it hurt to remember. "By the willow," she said. He mounted with her still in the saddle and rode down slow, his heart steady but his mind circling. Bandits? Drunk farmhands? Whoever tied up a woman and left her in this sun hadn't meant for her to be found alive. As they neared the trees, the girl grew tense. She started breathing faster. He felt her small frame press back against him, like she wanted to hide but couldn't. "She was still breathing," she said. "When I ran." Colt stopped the horse at the edge of the trees and dismounted. The creak crunched under his boots. He tied Belle to a branch, helped the girl down, and told her to wait. She clung to his leg. Colt knelt, brushed a hand through her hair. "You did good bringing me," he murmured. "Stay here now." He moved ahead, rifle loose in his hand, eyes sharp in the dim silver light. The willow stood ahead, its long fingers brushing the ground like it was trying to comfort the earth itself. Then he saw her. Maribel. Tied to the trunk, slumped but breathing. Rope dug into her wrists. One shoe missing. Her lips were blistered, face bruised, but her chest moved, shallow, steady. Colt exhaled through his nose. Relief and anger braided together in his chest like barbed wire. He knelt beside her and touched her face. She flinched. "Ma'am," he said low. "You're all right now?" Her eyes opened halfway, confusion swimming in them. "Annie," she rasped. "She's here. Safe." Tears welled, but she didn't cry. Just shut her eyes again, like that was the only part of her still working. Colt pulled out his knife and cut the ropes. They fell like snakes to the ground. She sagged forward into his arms, too weak to hold herself. "You hold on," he whispered. "Don't you let go now." He carried her back to the edge of the creek where the girl waited. Annie, he now knew her name, ran to her mother, wrapped tiny arms around her legs, even as they buckled. Colt laid her down gently, spread his coat over her. The wind had picked up again, cooler now. Night creeping in. "She needs water," he said, handing the canteen to Annie, who held it with both hands and poured it carefully into her mother's mouth. Maribel coughed once. Then sighed, long and low. He looked around. No camp nearby. No tracks except their own. Whoever left her here wanted her forgotten. Annie crawled up beside her mother, lying beside her like a pup curls against a wounded wolf. Colt stood over them, rifle still in hand, watching the night. Something in his chest cracked open then, just a little. Not pity. Not grief. Something older. Something dangerous. He looked down at the willow again. There, carved faintly into the bark, nearly hidden under rope burns, were 4 letters, S.K.D. Colt's eyes narrowed. His grip on the rifle tightened. He'd seen that carving before. And the last time he did, the man who made it had lit a saloon on fire with 3 women inside. Maribel's breath came shallow beneath the wool of Colt's coat. Each rise of her chest was a quiet battle, her body fighting the memory of rope and heat and desert silence. The willow tree still stood behind them, long branches swaying as if to cover its shame. Annie clutched her mother's hand like she could pour life back into it through sheer will. Colt built the fire low, using only what driftwood he found near the dry creek. Sparks rose into the dusk like stars fleeing the earth. He placed his canteen by the flame, warming the water just enough before offering another sip to Maribel. She turned her head away at first, but Annie's whisper coaxed her lips open. She drank barely, then fell still again. Her voice, when it finally came, was the sound of gravel turned soft by rain. "You didn't have to come," she murmured. Colt didn't answer right away. He watched the shadows move around them, how they leaned in when no one looked. "No child begs for help like that unless it's real." Her eyes fluttered open. Pale green, dulled by pain but sharp under it all. "And if she lied?" "Then she told a good lie." Maribel tried to smile, but her lips cracked instead. Blood beaded, red and stubborn. Annie wiped it gently with the hem of her skirt, fingers trembling. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried once. Colt watched them both, the girl too quiet for her age, the mother too worn for her years. He'd seen women left for dead before. He'd buried a few. But there was something in this one that pushed back against the dying. He passed her a small piece of jerky, torn soft at the edges. She took it, not because she was hungry but because he offered it without demand. "I was a schoolteacher," she said after a time. "Before the marriage. Before the prairie turned its back." Colt waited. "Thought he was kind. Thought maybe I could build a little life. But he drank like the sun drank water. And when he lost things, he gave me away like I was one." Her fingers found Annie's hair and curled around it. "They were his debt collectors," she added. "Said they'd take me and the child. Show me what being owed felt like." Colt's jaw moved once, slow and tense. His hand rested on the rifle laid beside his boot. He didn't ask for names. Didn't need to. 3 nights ago," she said, voice growing distant. "They argued whether to sell me or leave me. One was drunk. Thought it'd be funny to tie me up and let the coyotes vote." She looked at the sky. "I kept thinking. I'd hear Annie screaming. I ran, the girl whispered. I bit one of them. He dropped me. I ran until I forgot which way was forward. Colt glanced toward the willow again. That carving burned like a brand in the back of his mind. Maribel tried to sit, failed, and let her head rest against a folded saddlebag. If you hadn't come. He didn't let her finish. You don't owe me thanks, he said. You just owe that child more days with her mother. Annie leaned her head against her mama's side, and for a brief moment, the fire painted them gold again. Not broken. Not pitiful. Just two souls clinging together, stubborn as roots beneath stone. Night deepened. Coyotes called in the distance, high and cruel. Colt kept watch, rifle in hand, eyes never quite closing. Maribel stirred some time before dawn, coughing hard enough to pull her upright. She spat blood into the dust. Her face twisted, but not from pain, from shame. I should be dead, she said low. Colt shook his head. You're not. That's all that counts now. She turned her face toward him, studying him with that same dry-eyed gaze her daughter wore. Why do you care? He didn't answer for a long while. Finally, he said, My wife burned with our house. My son followed a week later, couldn't breathe from the smoke that stayed in his chest. I couldn't save them. Silence hung heavy after that. Maribel didn't offer sympathy. Didn't need to. The air itself bowed in respect. You never remarried? No, he said. Didn't see the point. You give your heart once and it burns, what's left doesn't catch again. Her eyes lowered. I'm sorry. So was I. For a long time. Annie shifted in her sleep, drawing closer to the warmth of her mother's side. Her little hand reached out unconsciously and found Colt's coat again, curling into it. Maribel watched the movement with something fragile behind her eyes. A mother's guilt. A survivor's ache. I didn't think I'd live, she whispered. Didn't think anyone would come. Colt looked to the east. Dawn painted the sky with quiet streaks of fire and ash. You got a chance now. That's more than most. He stood and began packing the few things he'd unpacked, his blanket, his kettle, the bits of bread he'd saved. Maribel struggled to sit again and manage this time. Her legs trembled, but they held. Where will you take us? Not far. Just out of reach, he said. I know a woman who keeps a boarding place. She's sharp, knows how to keep secrets. She'll see you safe for a time. Maribel nodded once. You won't stay? I can't, he said. Not yet. Her gaze lingered on him, full of things not yet shaped into words. Then she looked away, toward her sleeping daughter. Colt turned to check the saddle, tightened the cinch. The fire crackled behind him as the sun spilled gold across the land again. It was shaping up to be another blistering day. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside, nestled between folded rags, was a delicate silver locket. He hesitated, then handed it to Maribel. Found this near the willow, he said. Was buried in the dirt, looked like someone dropped it. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside, a tiny charcoal sketch, worn, nearly faded, of a man. Rough jaw, cruel smile. Initials scrawled in the corner, S.K.D. Her breath caught. Colt's voice was cold now. You recognize him? She stared down at the sketch. That's Silas Kane. The one who left me to die. Colt's eyes didn't blink. He's heading north, she said. Said something about joining with his brothers in Larkspur Ridge. Colt reached for the reins without a word. His mare shifted, sensing a tension deeper than command. Maribel called after him, voice just above a whisper. If you go, you won't come back the same. Colt stopped. The wind stirred dust between them. I never came back the same, he said. And then he rode off, the locket's reflection still dancing in the firelight behind him. Maribel stood barefoot in the boarding-house kitchen, her sleeves rolled to the elbow and her fingers sunk into a bowl of rising bread. The scent of yeast and ash from the wood-burning oven lingered in the air, mixing with the faint lemon oil the landlady liked to scrub into the floorboards. It had been 3 days since Colt rode off into the heat, and still, the quiet in her chest hadn't lifted. It pressed behind her ribs like smoke looking for a fire. Annie sat on the windowsill, her knees drawn up, sketching in a borrowed notebook. She didn't speak much, not anymore. But she watched the hallway for footsteps, watched her mother's hands as if waiting for them to falter. Maribel had smiled at her once that morning, a tired, cracked thing, and Annie had drawn it with such aching accuracy it made her want to weep. The boarding house was safe, as far as Maribel could tell. Miss Lottie, the owner, was stern but fair. She didn't ask questions she didn't want answers to. Her kitchen was sacred, her rules simple: no blood, no lawmen, and no men in the sleeping quarters after dusk. The place housed 3 other women and 2 small boys. They worked, they ate, they healed. Quietly. As if life might forget to hurt them if they didn't move too fast. Still, each night, Maribel would sit by the lamp, locket in hand, opening and closing it like a wound that wouldn't stay stitched. Silas Kane. That name had weight. Not just in her memory, but in the silence that followed when she'd whispered it to Lottie. There were men you feared. Then there were men you remembered in the dark because forgetting made you feel more helpless than you could bear. Colt hadn't said much before he left. He'd saddled his mare with steady hands, his mouth set in that hard, unmoving line. Annie had run to him, wrapped her arms around his leg. He'd crouched to meet her, thumb tracing the edge of her jaw. "You take care of your mama now," he'd said. Maribel hadn't stopped him. She wanted to. Every part of her had screamed to speak, to ask him to stay, to say the words she wasn't brave enough to find. But they'd hung there, unsaid, like too ripe fruit left clinging to the branch. Now, in the glow of kitchen light and floured dust, her hands moved without thought. She was baking something no one asked for, just to keep herself from listening too closely to every set of boots that passed the porch. A knock came, soft but firm. Maribel flinched. She wiped her hands and stepped to the door, heart tapping against her ribs. It wasn't Colt. It was the male rider, a thin boy with freckles and a ribbon tied around his satchel. He held out a folded paper, yellowed at the corners, names scrawled in blocky black. "For you," he said. "Dropped at the general store. Man said to make sure it reached you. Said it's urgent." She closed the door before reading. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the page. The ink bled in places, but the message was short. Larkspur Ridge, 1 mile past the old chapel. Found Silas. Not alone. Need quiet help. Tell Lottie if I don't return by Sunday. ***. There was no name, but she knew the hand. It was Colt's. Firm, steady, like the man himself. Sunday. That was 2 nights away. Her breath caught in her throat. He shouldn't have gone alone. Whatever vengeance haunted his boots, he didn't owe it to her. Not with a man like Silas. Not when he traveled with devils dressed as men. She folded the paper into fourths, tucked it into her apron. When she turned, Annie was standing behind her, wide-eyed. "Is he coming back?" the girl asked. Maribel crouched, pressing her hands gently around Annie's face. "He'll try." The words sounded brittle, even as she said them. Annie's voice dropped. "We could go to him. Help." "No, baby. It's not safe. And we promised Miss Lottie." Annie nodded, but something in her had already shifted. That same wild courage that sent her running from fire and fists hadn't dimmed. Maribel could see it. The girl was built of marrow that refused to break. That night, the storm rolled in. Rain patted the tin roof in uneven rhythms. Thunder rolled lazily across the plains like a drunk heading home. Maribel sat by the lamp again, her fingers rubbing the locket in slow circles. Annie slept curled on the cot beside her, one hand still holding the sketch she'd made of Colt, the lines sharp, the eyes just wrong enough to make him feel like a ghost already. Maribel didn't sleep. Not until morning, when exhaustion finally took her by force. When she woke, the kitchen smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. Lottie stood by the stove, arms folded, eyes unreadable. He's not back, she said flatly. Maribel's stomach turned. No. He's not. The older woman stirred her tea, not looking up. Men like him carry more ghosts than bullets. If he don't come back, it won't be because he forgot you. I know. Do you? Maribel swallowed. I do now. Lottie sighed and turned away, pouring the tea without spilling a drop. You and the girl got safe here. But safe and still ain't the same as living. If there's something you mean to do, don't wait till it's too late to mean it. Maribel nodded, almost imperceptibly. When Lottie left, she went to the drawer beside the sink, pulled out the bread knife. Not for use, but to feel the weight of something sharp in her hand. She stood there for a long while. The wind outside picked up again. And then, without a word, Maribel walked to her room, took out the paper Colt had sent, pressed it flat, and read it again. Larkspur Ridge. 1 mile past the chapel. Not alone. She folded it carefully, tucked it into the inside pocket of her shawl, then sat on the edge of the cot and began to lace her boots. Annie stirred, eyes fluttering open. Are we going? Maribel looked at her daughter. Not with fear. Not with guilt. But with the quiet resolve of a woman who'd once been left to die and had chosen, now, to live louder than those who tried to silence her. She whispered not to Annie, but to herself. We're not hiding anymore. And far off, on the other side of the waking world, a single gunshot cracked across the sky like a warning no one wanted to hear. The road to Larkspur Ridge was a ribbon of dust and forgotten prayers. It wound through the high country like a scar, lined with wind-warped crosses and fence posts chewed thin by time. Maribel walked it with her shawl wrapped tight, her boots cutting steady prints in the mud left behind by the last storm. Annie trailed just behind, small and quiet, her hand wrapped around the handle of a tin lunchbox they'd filled with bread, salt pork, and 2 apples gone soft at the edges. Maribel had told Lottie only that they were leaving to repay a kindness. The older woman had stared for a long moment, then nodded once and handed her a flask of whiskey and a thick wool cloak. She didn't say goodbye, only turned back to the kitchen and left the door open behind her. The chapel came into view near dusk, abandoned, half-eaten by moss and weather. Its steeple leaned like a drunk whispering secrets. Maribel paused beneath the warped sign that once read Our Lady of the Timberlands, now faded to near nothing. She touched the edge of the frame, fingers ghosting over the wood, then turned her eyes north. 1 mile more. She hadn't expected the climb. The ridge rose quick and cruel, the earth turning to shale and bitter pine. The trees grew closer together here, tangled like old lies. Each step was harder than the last, but Maribel didn't stop. The locket pressed against her chest like a second heartbeat. Annie never complained, though her breath came short. She only looked up once and asked, Do you think he's hurt? Maribel didn't answer. She didn't have the right kind of truth for that question. They crested the hill just as twilight spilled like ink across the valley. Below, nestled between rock outcroppings and blackened trees, sat the remains of a logging camp, broken wagons, shattered crates, and the faint glow of a fire too far off to warm anything but shadows. Maribel dropped to her knees behind a thicket of bramble. Annie crouched beside her, eyes wide and sharp. Voices floated up. Male. Rough-edged. One of them laughed, short, mean. Then another voice answered. Lower. Measured. Colt. Maribel's chest tightened. She grabbed Annie's hand and whispered, Stay. No matter what. Annie opened her mouth, but Maribel was already slipping through the trees, moving like wind along the ground. Her dress caught once on a thorn tore. She didn't stop. The camp came into focus, 4 men, 1 fire, and Colt bound to a pine post. His face was bloodied, one eye swollen shut, but he sat straight, gaze locked on the man crouched beside him. Silas Kane. He hadn't changed. If anything, the years had hardened what was already cruel. His face was all bone and smirk, hair slicked back with the same arrogance that once made him untouchable. He wore 2 pistols at his belt and a hunting knife strapped to his thigh, polished like it had never been used. Colt spoke again, voice hoarse. You'll wish you'd killed me clean. Silas chuckled. You talk like a man with time left. Maribel felt her hands trembling. She scanned the ground, saw a length of rusted chain, a broken lantern, a rock slick with moss. No weapon. No plan. Colt turned his head slightly, as if he felt her presence before he saw it. Their eyes met for the briefest breath. She moved then. A flash of motion. A crunch of boots. She grabbed the rock and hurled it hard, striking the man standing behind Silas Square in the temple. He crumpled without sound. The others reached for their guns, but she was already moving, ducking behind crates, drawing their fire wide. Colt twisted at the distraction, kicking his feet out just enough to unseat the post behind him. It leaned cracked. One of the men, young, twitchy, panicked and rushed forward. Colt's boot caught him in the gut, sending him sprawling. Silas snarled and turned toward the trees. Show yourself! Maribel stepped out slowly, hands raised. Looking for me, Silas? His smile faded. Well, he said, ain't this a ghost come home? You left me for dead. You were already halfway there. Behind her, Colt used the moment to free his wrists. Blood streamed from the cuts, but he stood, swaying only slightly. One hand reached for the fallen man's rifle. Walk away, Maribel said. Let us go. And this ends now. Silas laughed. You think a schoolteacher and a broken cowboy get to write the ending? A gun cocked. Colt raised the rifle. We ain't asking. But it was too late. One of the men lunged from behind, slamming into Colt and sending the rifle skittering into the fire. Flames licked up the barrel, catching oil-slick rags nearby. In seconds, the crates were ablaze. Gunfire split the air. Maribel Dove grabbed the hunting knife from the twitchy man's belt and rolled behind a stack of timber. Her fingers closed around the hilt like it belonged there. Colt wrestled the attacker to the ground, fist meeting jaw with brutal rhythm. Silas backed away, pistol raised toward Maribel. Then, a sharp cry. From the ridge. Annie. She'd left the thicket. She stood just yards above the camp, a small figure silhouetted by firelight, eyes locked on her mother. Silas turned the gun toward the girl. No! Maribel screamed. She moved faster than she thought her body could. Threw the knife with a prayer she barely believed in. It hit. Not deep, but enough to knock the pistol from Silas's grip. Colt surged forward, tackled him to the ground, fists landing hard, unrelenting. The others fled into the trees, the fire growing behind them like a second sun. Maribel ran to Annie, pulling her into her arms, sobs breaking loose at last. I told you to stay. I couldn't, Annie whispered. I couldn't let him hurt you again. Colt stood over Silas, who lay broken and groaning, the knife still beside him. You want him dead? Colt asked. Maribel looked down. No, she said. I want him forgotten. She turned, taking Annie's hand, and started walking toward the trees, the fire behind them painting their shadows long. But just before the smoke swallowed the camp, Colt reached into Silas's coat pocket and pulled something free. A folded sheet of paper. He opened it. Read the words once. And his face changed. His voice was quiet. They weren't after just her. The wind had teeth that night, biting through the shredded canvas of the girl's bonnet as she sat on the wagon's edge, her legs dangling above the dirt. The fire crackled near the rocks, throwing shadows over the battered shape of her mother lying still beneath a blanket. Beside them, the cowboy stirred the stew pot with slow, absent-minded movements, his jaw clenched like a man resisting the howl rising in his throat. She hadn't spoken much since the barn. Only short answers, careful ones. But now her small voice trembled through the dusk. Do you think she'll ever smile again? The cowboy didn't answer at first. He kept stirring, watching the flicker of orange on the girl's too thin cheeks. I reckon if she hears your laugh again, she might remember how. I forgot how, she whispered. He put the ladle down and stood. A moment later he knelt beside her mother and checked her forehead. The fever had broken, but she was still lost somewhere far away. Her wrists were clean now, the robe burned softened by salve, but the wounds beneath, he couldn't reach those. "You ain't alone," he said gently, not to the girl this time, but to the woman who couldn't hear. "Not anymore." She stirred. Her cracked lips moved. The girl scrambled down, her boots thudding softly. "Mama?" Her eyes opened, just barely. Bloodshot, blurred. She blinked once, twice, as if waking from 100 bad dreams. Then her gaze found the little girl's face, and a sound broke in her throat, not quite a sob, not quite a word. Her fingers twitched. The girl caught her hand. "I got you, Mama," she whispered. "You ain't tied no more." The cowboy stepped back into the shadows, letting the moment bloom without him. But he didn't leave. His hand brushed the grip of his revolver, half habit, half memory. Because he knew someone out there had left this woman for dead, and he hadn't seen the last of them. At dawn, they moved on. The mother could barely sit up, but he rigged a sling for her between two bales, and the girl held her the whole way, arms wrapped tight. The wagon creaked through canyons and sagebrush, over ridges where the air smelled like pine and morning. He didn't ask their names. Not yet. Some names came with pain, and others with danger. That night, they reached the old stone cabin. It had belonged to a trapper he once knew, long dead now. Half collapsed, moss on the north wall, but the hearth still stood strong. He built a fire and laid the mother near it, wrapped in wool and peace. He cooked beans and coffee while the girl watched him, suspicion softening into something closer to trust. She finally asked, "Why'd you help us?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "'Cause someone once helped me. And I never got to pay it back." She nodded like she understood, even if she didn't. Her fingers played with the buttons on her dress, missing 3, stitched crooked. "Mama's name is Elsie. Mine's Ruth." He looked at her for a long time. "That's a good name, Ruth." She smiled, barely, and looked toward the flames. Elsie slept through the night, and when morning came, she sat up on her own. The color had returned to her cheeks. She tried to speak, but her voice rasped like dead leaves. He handed her water. "Ain't no rush," he murmured. Her eyes darted over the room, taking him in, the scars on his hands, the quiet behind his eyes. "Where are we?" "Safe," he said. "That's all that matters." She stared at him. Then at Ruth, curled by the fire with a blanket. Her voice cracked. "What's your name?" He paused. "Matthew." Silence passed between them like a page turning. Then she nodded, slow and heavy with something unsaid. 3 days passed. He mended the cabin roof with pine slats. He rode into town once, brought back flour, coffee, and boots for Ruth. He came back with eyes sharp and mouth set. "There a skin around," he said to Elsie. "The man who tied you. He's got kin. Mean kin." She looked away. "You don't have to tell me everything," he added, "but I need to know if he'll come lookin'. I need to know if you want to run, or fight." She stared at the fire, then met his eyes with something fierce beneath the surface. "He already took everything. There ain't nothin' left to run from." He nodded. "Then we stay." The next day, while Ruth played outside with a stick in her imagination, Elsie stood in the doorway, her figure thin but upright. "He ain't her father." Matthew's hand stilled on the saddle he was oiling. "He was her uncle. My husband's brother. When my man died, they gave her to him. Said she was his responsibility. But he—" She looked down. "He didn't treat her like a child. Or me like a sister-in-law." Matthew's jaw set. His knuckles whitened. "I tried to run. Got caught. They said they'd make an example of me." She looked out toward her daughter. "You know the rest." He stepped closer, his voice like gravel. "You saved her. That's more than most." Her breath caught. "I didn't save her. She saved me." That night, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked over the hills. Rain pounded the roof. But inside the stone walls, firelight danced and warm bread filled the room with hope. Matthew stood watch long after they slept, rifle across his knees. At dawn, he walked out into the rain, his boots sinking into wet soil. He followed the ridge until he reached the overlook. Below, in the distance, 3 riders, slow, circling like buzzards. He returned by noon. Mud on his coat. Fire in his chest. Elsie saw the look and stood. "They're comin', aren't they?" "Not yet," he said. "But they will." "What do we do?" He looked past her to the girl, humming softly to herself as she brushed the horse's mane with a pine branch. Then back to Elsie. "We get ready," he said. "And when they come—" He paused, eyes narrowing. "They're gonna wish they hadn't."